What if the most important battlefield in the Middle East right now isn't being shaped by the United States, Iran, or Israel, but by Ukraine? A country fighting for its own survival is suddenly exporting the one thing no superpower can mass produce: real, battlefield-tested experience against modern drone warfare. Nobody expected Ukraine to appear in the strategic equation of the Strait of Hormuz. This is a corridor where nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply moves through a space so narrow that even a single disruption can ripple across global markets within hours. Traditionally, this has been a domain dominated by naval power, carrier groups, destroyers, surveillance satellites. But what Ukraine is introducing into this space is something fundamentally different: adaptive, real-time combat knowledge shaped under constant pressure. After years of facing waves of drones, missile strikes, and infrastructure attacks in the war with Russia, Ukraine has developed a level of operational familiarity with drone threats that few others possess. This isn't theoretical doctrine. It's survival-driven innovation. Acoustic sensors, mobile detection systems, decentralized drone interception tactics. These are tools refined under daily threat, not in controlled environments. Now that expertise is being exported to the Gulf, particularly into Saudi Arabia, where thousands of Ukrainian-developed acoustic sensors are reportedly being deployed. These systems are designed to detect drones not through traditional radar, but through sound signatures, an approach that becomes especially valuable in environments where drones are small, low-flying, and difficult to track. The presence of Ukrainian trainers and operators in the region adds another layer. Training over 200 personnel in drone defense is not just a tactical contribution, it's a transfer of doctrine. It means Gulf states are not just buying equipment, they're importing a way of thinking about warfare that has been shaped in one of the most intense modern conflicts. Then there is the naval dimension. Ukrainian mine-hunting capabilities being positioned for potential deployment into the Strait of Hormuz signals a shift in how maritime threats are being approached. Mines, like drones, are asymmetric tools. They are relatively low cost, but can create massive disruption. Clearing or managing them requires specialized expertise, and Ukraine has had to adapt quickly to these kinds of threats in contested waters. What makes this development significant is not just the capability itself, but the timing. The United States, despite its overwhelming military presence, is facing a type of threat that is decentralized, adaptive, and constantly evolving. Traditional systems are powerful, but they are not always flexible. Ukraine, by contrast, has been forced to become flexible. This creates an unusual dynamic. A country that relies heavily on Western support is now, in a specific domain, providing something valuable back. Experience that even advanced militaries lack in practical terms. It shifts Ukraine from being purely a recipient of security assistance to becoming a contributor in shaping regional defense strategies. The broader implication is strategic. By embedding itself in Gulf security structures, Ukraine is extending its relevance far beyond Eastern Europe. It is positioning itself as a key player in the global response to emerging threats like drone warfare and maritime disruption. That kind of positioning has long-term consequences, both politically and militarily. And then there's the question of who loses in this shift. It's not just about Iran, even though its drone capabilities are clearly a factor in why these systems are being deployed. The deeper shift affects any actor that relies on asymmetric pressure, because once those tactics are understood, adapted to, and countered, their effectiveness diminishes. So this is not a side story. It is a quiet transformation happening in parallel to more visible conflicts. Ukraine is leveraging its hardest-earned lessons and projecting them into one of the most strategically sensitive regions in the world. And in doing so, it is reshaping not just how wars are fought, but who gets to influence them. What if the biggest weakness in American military power isn't something advanced, but something simple, cheap, and already being used against it? And what if the only country that has truly figured out how to stop it is Ukraine? To understand why Ukraine matters in the Gulf, you have to look at the pressure point inside Saudi Arabia, specifically Prince Sultan Air Base. This is not just another installation. It is the operational core of American air power in the region. From here, United States Central Command coordinates air campaigns, surveillance, and force projection across multiple theaters. The assets based there are critical. The Boeing E-3 Sentry provides airborne early warning, essentially the eyes of the Air Force. Without it, situational awareness drops significantly. The F-35 Lightning II represents cutting-edge strike capability, and the KC-135 Stratotanker fleet extends operational range, allowing aircraft to remain in the air longer and strike deeper. But here's the problem. All of that high-end capability is being challenged by something fundamentally low-tech. Iranian-designed Shahed drone systems are cheap, slow, and fly at low altitude. They are not designed to win through sophistication. They are designed to win through volume and persistence. Swarms of these drones can overwhelm systems that were built to intercept faster, higher-value threats like ballistic missiles. This creates a mismatch. Systems like Patriot missile defenses are incredibly advanced, but they are optimized for a different type of threat. When faced with dozens of low-flying drones approaching simultaneously, the cost equation flips. Expensive interceptors are used against cheap targets, and saturation becomes a real risk. That vulnerability is not theoretical. Incidents over the past year have demonstrated that even high-value assets, like AWACS aircraft operating at or near bases, can be threatened under the right conditions. That forces a strategic rethink, because if the eyes and reach of American air power are at risk, then the entire structure of air dominance becomes less certain. And this is where Ukraine changes the equation. Over years of war with Russia, Ukraine has faced large-scale deployments of these exact drone systems, not once or twice, but repeatedly, under real combat conditions. What Ukraine developed is not just technology, it's doctrine. Layered defenses combining acoustic detection, mobile fire units, electronic disruption, and rapid response coordination. This kind of adaptation cannot be replicated quickly in labs or simulations. It comes from sustained exposure to the threat. Ukraine has learned how to detect drones early, track them without relying solely on radar, and neutralize them using cost-effective methods that don't exhaust high-end interceptors. Now that knowledge is being transferred. By deploying sensors, training personnel, and sharing operational tactics in the Gulf, Ukraine is effectively plugging a gap that even the most advanced militaries have struggled with. It is introducing a system designed not for perfect interception, but for resilience under saturation, something that is critical in a drone-heavy threat environment. The broader implication is significant. This is not just about defending a single base. It's about reshaping how modern air defense works against asymmetric threats. And in doing so, Ukraine is positioning itself as a key contributor in a domain where traditional military hierarchies don't automatically apply. So when you look at this situation, the real shift is not just technological, it's strategic. The balance of expertise is changing. And in a region where power has long been defined by scale and spending, the advantage is quietly moving toward those who have already fought and adapted to the future of warfare. What if the most advanced air defense system in the Gulf right now isn't a missile battery, a radar dome, or a billion-dollar platform, but a network of microphones buried in the sand, listening for a sound most systems were never designed to hear? What Ukraine has introduced through the Sky Fortress initiative is not just a new layer of defense. It is a complete shift in how threats are detected and neutralized. Built under the Brave One Defense Innovation Program, this system emerged from necessity, not theory. Facing relentless waves of Shahed 136 attacks during the war with Russia, Ukraine was forced to solve a problem that traditional defense systems struggled with. How do you detect and stop something that is cheap, low, slow, and deployed in numbers? The answer was unconventional. Instead of relying solely on radar, which struggles with low-altitude, small signature targets, Ukraine turned to sound. Acoustic sensors, originally improvised from modified commercial microphone components, evolved into highly specialized detection systems. These sensors are now capable of identifying the unique engine signature of a drone in fractions of a second, even in noisy environments like desert terrain. Deployed across Saudi Arabia in the thousands, these sensors form a distributed listening network. Unlike traditional systems, which rely on centralized nodes, this network is decentralized and layered. Each sensor captures audio data and feeds it into an AI-supported command system that processes inputs in real time. The system doesn't just detect noise, it interprets it. The artificial intelligence layer is what transforms this from a sensor grid into a decision-making system. It filters out environmental interference, wind, machinery, traffic, and isolates patterns consistent with drone engines. Once identified, it calculates trajectory, speed, and likely target within seconds. This compresses the response timeline dramatically, turning detection into actionable intelligence almost instantly. What makes the system particularly effective is its invisibility. These sensors are not obvious installations. They are embedded into the environment, hidden in terrain, structures, and perimeter zones. This is not accidental. It is a deliberate design choice. A system that cannot be easily located cannot be easily neutralized. It removes one of the key advantages an attacker typically has, the ability to target defensive infrastructure. And then comes the second layer, the response. Instead of deploying expensive interceptors like Patriot missiles, which can cost millions per shot, Ukraine's model relies on interceptor drones. This flips the cost equation entirely. Instead of spending high-value assets to destroy low-cost threats, the response becomes scalable and economically sustainable. Interceptor drones can be launched quickly, guided by the same data generated from the acoustic network, and used to engage incoming threats at relatively low cost. This creates a layered defense where detection is passive, distributed, and difficult to disrupt, while interception is flexible and repeatable. The broader implication is significant. This is not just a technological upgrade, it is a doctrinal shift. Defense is no longer about building stronger walls. It is about building smarter systems that adapt faster than the threat evolves. Ukraine has essentially demonstrated that resilience against drone warfare comes not from singular powerful systems, but from networks that are cheap, scalable, and intelligent. And this is why it matters beyond the Gulf. Because once this model proves effective, it changes expectations everywhere. It challenges the assumption that defense must always be expensive to be effective. It shows that innovation under pressure can outperform traditional procurement cycles. So what you're seeing is more than a response to a specific threat. It is the emergence of a new way of thinking about defense, one where detection is invisible, response is scalable, and advantage belongs to the side that adapts fastest. What if the most powerful weapon in modern warfare isn't the one that destroys the enemy, but the one that makes the attack disappear before anyone even knows it happened? What is unfolding now around Prince Sultan Air Base is a quiet transformation of how defense actually works in the age of drones. Ukrainian-developed systems are not just being deployed, they are being taught, refined, and integrated into American operations in real time. This is not theory or simulation. It is knowledge transferred from a battlefield where Ukraine had no margin for error. The use of interceptor systems like Coyote Interceptor and Ukrainian-built solutions represents a fundamental shift. Instead of relying on expensive limited missile systems, the response is now scalable, fast, and economically sustainable. Cheap drones are met with cheap interceptors, but guided by superior intelligence. This is not about overpowering the threat. It is about outthinking it. What makes this system effective is not just the hardware. It is the integration. Detection through acoustic networks, processing through AI-driven systems, and interception through coordinated drone response all operate as a single architecture. Each layer feeds the next in real time. The result is a system that doesn't just react, It anticipates and neutralizes before the threat fully materializes. And this is where the strategic shift becomes clear. American forces, backed by decades of technological dominance, are now learning from Ukrainian operators who developed these methods under constant attack from Russia using Iranian-designed drones. This reverses a traditional dynamic. It shows that experience under pressure can produce solutions faster than even the most advanced defense ecosystems. But the most important element of this system is not what it does, it's what it prevents. Modern conflict is no longer just about physical damage, it is about perception. Every successful strike creates visibility. Visibility creates headlines. Headlines create fear, uncertainty, and economic consequences. This is especially true in regions like Saudi Arabia, where stability is directly tied to global energy markets and investor confidence. Ukraine understands this because it has lived it. Every successful strike on its infrastructure carried psychological and economic impact far beyond the immediate damage. The lesson it extracted is now being applied in the Gulf. The best defense is not just stopping the attack, it is erasing its visibility entirely. The acoustic interception network is designed with that principle at its core. If a drone is detected early, intercepted quietly, and destroyed before impact, the event never enters public awareness. No explosion, no footage, no narrative. From a strategic standpoint, it is as if the attack never happened. This directly targets the logic behind swarm tactics. Systems like the Shahed 136 rely on saturation and psychological effect. Even a few successful strikes can generate disproportionate fear and signal vulnerability. But if those strikes consistently fail, silently and invisibly, the entire strategy begins to lose its value. So what you are seeing is not just defense, it is narrative denial. It is the removal of the enemy's ability to create impact beyond the battlefield. No visible success means no leverage. No leverage means diminished strategic influence. And that is why this matters far beyond one base or one region. Because once this model proves sustainable, it changes how nations think about protection, deterrence, and even warfare itself. Victory is no longer defined by what is destroyed, but by what never happens at all. What if the real battle for the global economy isn't happening in the air, but underwater? In a 21-mile corridor where a single explosion could send shockwaves across every market on Earth. The focus shifts now to the Strait of Hormuz, the most sensitive maritime choke point in the world. This narrow passage carries roughly a fifth of global oil supply, which means disruption here doesn't stay regional. It becomes global within hours. And Iran's strategy in this space has never depended on overwhelming force. It depends on uncertainty. The logic is simple but powerful. Iran does not need to close the strait completely. It only needs to make the risk of transit feel unacceptable. A single successful strike on a tanker, or even the credible threat of one, can trigger cascading effects. Insurance premiums spike, shipping routes shift, and supply chains tighten. The disruption happens before sustained conflict even begins. At the center of this strategy are naval mines. Cheap, passive, and extremely difficult to detect, they are one of the most effective asymmetric tools in maritime warfare. Unlike missiles or drones, mines do not require continuous operation. They wait. They sit in critical shipping lanes, especially in narrow, predictable routes used by large vessels, and create a persistent threat that cannot be ignored. This is where Ukraine enters the equation again, but this time at sea. The deployment of specialized mine countermeasure vessels into the Gulf represents a significant shift. These are not general-purpose warships. They are designed specifically for one task: finding and neutralizing mines in high-risk environments. Ships like the Sandown-class minehunter, including vessels such as Chernihiv and Cherkasy, are built with materials that minimize magnetic signatures. This is critical because many naval mines are triggered by changes in magnetic fields. A standard steel-hulled ship risks setting off the very threat it is trying to remove. These vessels are engineered to avoid that risk entirely. In addition, platforms like the Alkmaar-class minehunter, used by European navies and now linked to Ukrainian operations, bring advanced capabilities. They deploy remotely operated underwater vehicles, sonar mapping systems, and acoustic detection tools to identify mines from a distance. This reduces the need for human divers and increases both safety and efficiency. What makes this development important is not just the hardware, but the experience behind it. Ukraine has been operating in contested environments where mines, drones, and asymmetric threats are constant factors. That experience translates into faster identification, better pattern recognition, and more effective clearance operations under pressure. From a strategic perspective, this directly targets Iran's leverage. If mines can be detected and cleared quickly and consistently, the psychological and economic impact of deploying them diminishes. The threat becomes manageable rather than paralyzing. And once the perception of uncontrollable risk is reduced, the entire strategy begins to lose effectiveness. This mirrors what we saw in the air. Just as drone swarms lose value when they are intercepted silently and consistently, mine warfare loses impact when clearance becomes routine and reliable. In both cases, the key is not just neutralizing the weapon, but neutralizing its ability to create fear and disruption. So what is happening in the Gulf right now is a two-layered transformation. Above the surface, drone threats are being quietly intercepted. Below the surface, mine threats are being systematically reduced. Together, they form a comprehensive effort to remove the uncertainty that adversaries rely on. And that is the deeper shift. Power in this region has long been defined by the ability to threaten disruption. What Ukraine is contributing, both in the air and at sea, is the ability to absorb, manage, and quietly eliminate that disruption before it reshapes the system. What if the balance of power in the Gulf isn't being decided by the biggest fleets or the most expensive weapons, but by the side that can adapt fastest and act immediately? What Ukraine is bringing into the maritime domain goes far beyond hardware. It is operational tempo, shaped under real combat pressure. Mine countermeasure vessels operating in and around the Strait of Hormuz are not just clearing threats, they are redefining how quickly and safely that can be done. Using unmanned underwater vehicles, these ships can detect, approach, and neutralize mines from a distance, eliminating the need for divers to enter dangerous zones. What once took weeks of high-risk operations can now be executed in hours, with precision and minimal exposure. This capability is not theoretical. It is the result of hard-earned experience by Ukraine during the war with Russia, where the Black Sea became one of the most heavily mined maritime environments in modern conflict. Ukrainian naval forces were forced to adapt quickly or risk catastrophic losses. That pressure created a level of institutional knowledge that no simulation or peacetime training could replicate. Training at facilities like Portsmouth Naval Base brought Ukrainian crews to NATO operational standards. But the real value they bring is beyond certification. It is experience under fire. This is why Ukrainian officers are not simply participating in Gulf operations. They are helping shape them. They are operating as practitioners who have already faced the exact type of threat environment now emerging in the region. From a strategic standpoint, this shifts Ukraine's role. It is not entering as a junior partner. It is contributing expertise that others currently lack. And that changes how operations are planned, executed, and prioritized. When the most experienced voice in the room comes from a country that has been fighting a full-scale war, decision-making dynamics change. But the transformation doesn't stop at operations. It extends into long-term structure. The defense agreements Ukraine has signed with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates represent a deeper shift. These are not traditional procurement deals. They are integrated partnerships covering joint production, AI-driven defense systems, electronic warfare, and shared operational development. What made these agreements possible is not just capability, it is speed. Traditional defense procurement, particularly through systems tied to United States processes, often involves long timelines, layered approvals, and restrictions that can delay deployment for years. Ukraine offers something different: immediate implementation. Systems, training, and operational integration delivered on timelines measured in days or weeks, not years. That urgency comes directly from Ukraine's wartime reality. In a conflict environment, delay is not an inconvenience. It is a risk to survival. That mindset translates into how Ukraine now engages internationally. Gulf states facing real-time threats, from drones, missiles, and maritime disruption, are prioritizing responsiveness over perfection. Then there is the naval strike dimension. Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels like the Sea Baby and Macgregor V5 represent another layer of disruption. These systems have already demonstrated their effectiveness in the Black Sea, where they forced elements of the Russian fleet to reposition and operate more defensively. They showed that relatively low-cost, unmanned platforms could challenge traditional naval power in ways that were not fully anticipated. Bringing that capability into the Gulf environment introduces a new variable. It adds a mobile, asymmetric layer to maritime security, one that complements mine clearance and surveillance by providing active deterrence. It means that threats are not only detected and removed, but can also be countered dynamically if escalation occurs. Taken together, this creates a multi-layered architecture: acoustic detection and interception in the air, mine detection and neutralization underwater, and unmanned strike capability on the surface. Each layer reinforces the others, reducing vulnerability across domains. The broader implication is long-term. This is not a temporary adjustment. It is the beginning of a structural shift in how Gulf security is organized. Ukraine is embedding itself not just as a supplier, but as a partner, shaping doctrine, timelines, and operational thinking. And that is where the real change lies. Because in modern conflict, advantage no longer belongs solely to those with the most resources. It belongs to those who can adapt fastest, deploy immediately, and apply lessons learned under real conditions. Ukraine has done that, and now it is exporting that model into one of the most strategically important regions in the world. What if the country that was supposed to be weakened and contained is now rewriting the rules of military power and taking markets, influence, and credibility from the very state that tried to destroy it? What Ukraine demonstrated in the Black Sea, particularly in strikes like those targeting the Kerch Bridge, was not just tactical success. It was proof of concept. A force without a traditional blue water navy showed that unmanned systems, if designed and deployed correctly, can achieve strategic-level outcomes against a conventionally superior opponent. That lesson is now being exported into the Strait of Hormuz. The introduction of unmanned surface vessels like the Macgregor V5 and Sea Baby changes how maritime security operates. These are not passive systems. They are fast, agile, and capable of intercepting threats before they reach critical distance. At speeds approaching 50 miles per hour, they can respond to fast-moving small boats in ways that traditional naval escorts often cannot match. This directly challenges one of Iran's core tactics in the Gulf: the use of fast attack craft to pressure or threaten commercial shipping. These small, highly mobile units rely on speed and surprise to close distance quickly. But when defensive systems can match or exceed that speed and operate continuously as escorts, the window of vulnerability shrinks dramatically. What makes the system more transformative is its multi-domain capability. These unmanned vessels are not limited to surface engagement. By deploying aerial interceptor drones from onboard platforms, they create a dual-layer defense, capable of responding simultaneously to threats from the air and the sea. Against Shahed 136 systems approaching from above and fast boats approaching from the surface, a single integrated platform can engage both. Then comes the network effect, the wolf pack tactic: multiple unmanned vessels operating in coordinated formation eliminates traditional gaps in coverage. Each unit covers a sector, shares targeting data, and responds dynamically as part of a system,
rather than as isolated assets. This is critical because Iran's strategy has long relied on exploiting gaps in speed, in detection, in reaction time.
A networked swarm removes those gaps, and once the defense becomes as distributed and adaptive as the offense, numerical advantage alone stops being decisive. You cannot overwhelm a system that scales and responds collectively in real time. But the deeper impact of this shift extends beyond the Gulf, and this is where Russia enters the picture. For years, Russia positioned itself as an alternative defense supplier to the West, offering systems like the S-400 missile system without the political conditions often attached to American deals. This made Moscow an attractive partner for countries seeking capability without constraints. That model is now under pressure. Because Ukraine is not just offering systems, it is offering proven solutions, delivered quickly, shaped by real combat, and adaptable to immediate needs. Every agreement Ukraine signs with Gulf states is not just a partnership, it is a displacement. A contract that might once have gone to Russia is now going elsewhere. This creates a layered loss for Moscow. On one level, it is economic, lost defense contracts, reduced influence in key markets. But on a deeper level, it is reputational. The same Ukrainian systems being offered abroad are the ones that forced elements of the Russian fleet to reposition and operate defensively in the Black Sea. That reality is visible to every military planner evaluating procurement decisions. And that visibility matters. Because military credibility today is no longer defined purely by size or legacy capability. It is defined by performance under pressure, by adaptability, by whether a system works, not in theory, but in combat. So what you're seeing is more than a regional adjustment. It is a shift in how power is measured and how influence is earned. Ukraine is leveraging its battlefield experience to project influence far beyond its borders, while Russia is facing the consequences of a model that is being challenged in real time. The irony is hard to miss. A war intended to limit Ukraine's strategic trajectory has instead accelerated it, turning it into a competitor in markets and domains that were once considered out of reach. And that is the real transformation. Because once credibility shifts, it doesn't just change who sells weapons, it changes who shapes the future of warfare. What if the future of military power isn't decided by who owns the most weapons, but by who has actually used them under fire and survived? For decades, military strength was measured in scale, fleet size, air power, defense budgets. But what Gulf states are now seeing, especially in places like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, is that those metrics don't always translate into effectiveness against modern threats. The shift is towards something far more difficult to quantify: combat-proven adaptability. What Ukraine brings to the table is not just equipment, it is validation under real conditions. Systems that have faced thousands of incoming threats, adapted in real time, and continued functioning under pressure, carry a level of credibility that no controlled test environment can replicate. A drone defense system that has repeatedly defeated Shahed 136 attacks in active war zones represents a fundamentally different level of assurance than one tested in ideal conditions. The same applies at sea. Mine-clearing doctrine developed in contested waters against Russia is not theoretical. It is a result of survival-driven learning. In environments where a single mistake could mean the loss of a vessel and its crew, procedures are refined quickly and ruthlessly. That kind of experience cannot be simulated, and it is precisely what makes Ukraine's expertise so valuable in regions like the Strait of Hormuz. This is why Ukraine's role is expanding beyond that of a traditional defense partner. It is becoming a provider of operational knowledge, something even the most advanced defense contractors cannot easily offer. Western systems may be technologically superior on paper, but many have not been tested at the same intensity or frequency as Ukrainian-developed solutions over the past 4 years. The economic dimension of this shift is just as significant. Ukraine is no longer operating solely as a recipient of military aid. It is actively exchanging its most valuable asset, combat-proven expertise, for resources it urgently needs. Agreements with Gulf states involve not just funding, but energy supply guarantees and access to advanced technologies that can be reintegrated into Ukraine's own defense ecosystem. This creates a feedback loop. The more Ukraine exports its expertise, the more resources it gains to sustain and evolve its own capabilities. In effect, it is converting battlefield experience into strategic capital, financial, technological, and political. On the ground, this transformation is visible. Hundreds of Ukrainian operators and military specialists are now embedded across Gulf states and beyond, including in Kuwait and Jordan. They are not acting as contractors in the traditional sense. They are trainers, advisors, and practitioners, passing on methods that were developed under real combat conditions. This is how a new security doctrine spreads, not through manuals, but through people, through those who have faced the threat directly and can teach not just what to do, but how to think under pressure. Drone warfare, acoustic detection, layered defense, naval countermeasures. These are being transferred as lived experience, not theoretical instruction. The broader implication is that Ukraine is redefining its position in the global system. It is no longer just a frontline state in a regional conflict. It is becoming a node of military innovation and expertise, influencing how other regions prepare for emerging threats. And this is where the deeper shift lies. Because once combat experience becomes the primary currency of military credibility, the hierarchy of power begins to change. Nations that have adapted under fire gain influence disproportionate to their size or budget. So what you are seeing is not just Ukraine expanding its partnerships. It is Ukraine reshaping how value is measured in modern defense. Not by how much you have, but by what you have proven you can do when it matters most. What if the biggest shift in this entire war isn't happening on the front lines, but in the relationships Ukraine is building far beyond them? At the start of the war with Russia, Ukraine was defined by dependence. It relied on Western ammunition, financial aid, and political backing to sustain its resistance. That reality hasn't disappeared, but it has evolved. What we're seeing now is a transition from dependency to interdependence, and that's a very different strategic position. Ukraine is no longer only asking for support. It is offering something in return that its partners cannot easily replicate. In the Gulf, countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar are not engaging Ukraine out of political alignment alone. They are doing so because they need what Ukraine has developed: real, combat-tested solutions to modern threats. This exchange is direct and pragmatic. Gulf states gain access to acoustic detection networks, drone defense systems, mine-clearing expertise, and operational doctrine shaped under constant pressure. Ukraine, in turn, secures what it urgently needs: energy stability, financial resources, and access to technologies that feed back into its own defense capabilities. This is not aid. It is a transactional partnership built on mutual necessity. Look at the structure Ukraine is building. In the air, across Saudi territory, a network of thousands of acoustic sensors is quietly monitoring for low-altitude threats. These systems, refined in war conditions, feed into AI-driven platforms that can detect and classify incoming drones, such as Shahed 136, within seconds. The response layer, using interceptor drones, neutralizes threats before they become visible events. At facilities like Prince Sultan Air Base, Ukrainian instructors are training personnel on systems that did not originate from traditional Western defense pipelines. This reverses expectations. Instead of knowledge flowing only from established military powers outward, it is now flowing from a country that developed its expertise under continuous attack. At sea, the same pattern holds. Ukrainian mine countermeasure vessels are contributing to operations around the Strait of Hormuz, where maritime security is directly tied to global economic stability. These ships, backed by crews with extensive real-world experience, are addressing one of the most persistent asymmetric threats in the region. On the surface, unmanned naval systems add another layer. Fast-moving drone vessels, operating in coordinated formations, provide both surveillance and active defense for shipping lanes. Their ability to respond to both aerial and surface threats simultaneously creates a flexible security architecture that reduces reliance on slower, more centralized assets. Behind all of this is a longer-term framework. Multi-year defense agreements between Ukraine and Gulf states are not limited to immediate deployment. They include joint production, shared development of next-generation systems, and deeper institutional ties. This means the relationship is not temporary. It is being built to last. What's important here is the cumulative effect. Ukraine is not contributing one capability. It is building an integrated system across air, sea, and operational doctrine. Each layer reinforces the others, creating a comprehensive approach to modern asymmetric threats. And that is where the strategic shift becomes clear. Ukraine has moved from being a consumer of security to a co-producer of it. It is shaping how other regions defend themselves, while simultaneously strengthening its own position through those partnerships. This doesn't eliminate Ukraine's need for Western support, but it changes the balance of the relationship. It introduces leverage. It creates options. It gives Ukraine something it did not fully have before, the ability to influence, not just depend. So when you step back, what you're seeing is not just cooperation, it's transformation. A country that entered the war as a recipient is now operating as a provider, embedding itself into the security architecture of one of the most strategically important regions in the world. What if the defining power of the 21st century isn't size, or budget, or fleets, but relevance? The ability to solve the exact problem that matters, exactly when it matters. That's the shift Ukraine is demonstrating right now, and nowhere is it clearer than in how it is embedding itself into Gulf security architecture. This is no longer about selling equipment. Ukraine is integrating electronic warfare software, detection systems, and operational doctrine directly into the defense frameworks of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. That positions it not as a supplier, but as a co-developer of how these states will defend themselves through the next decade. This is a fundamentally different role. Traditional defense relationships are transactional. Equipment is purchased, delivered, and maintained. What Ukraine is building is structural. It is shaping doctrine, influencing decision-making, and embedding its systems into how these militaries think and operate. That kind of integration creates long-term influence that extends far beyond any single contract. And it highlights something deeper about modern power. Historically, influence correlated with scale, large armies, massive defense budgets, global naval reach. By those metrics, Ukraine should not be in this position. It has no aircraft carriers. Its military is under constant strain. Its economy has been under pressure since the war with Russia began. Yet despite that, Ukraine is actively contributing to the defense of critical infrastructure in the Gulf. It is helping protect installations like Prince Sultan Air Base, using systems that did not emerge from traditional procurement pipelines. It is supporting maritime security operations in the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point central to the global economy. What explains that contradiction is relevance. Ukraine's capabilities are not theoretical. They are the product of necessity. Every system it deploys has been tested under real conditions against real threats. Acoustic detection networks were developed because drones like the Shahed 136 were actively targeting Ukrainian cities. Mine-clearing expertise was built because naval mines were a direct and persistent threat. Unmanned naval systems were refined because Ukraine needed a way to challenge a stronger fleet. This creates a different kind of credibility, not based on specifications or projections, but on demonstrated performance. And in an environment where threats are immediate and evolving, that kind of credibility carries more weight than theoretical superiority. From Iran's perspective, this matters. Its strategy in the Strait of Hormuz has long relied on asymmetric tools, mines, drone swarms, fast attack craft, to impose cost and uncertainty. These tools were effective because they exploited gaps in conventional defense systems. But what Ukraine is introducing is not just countermeasures. It is experience in neutralizing those exact tactics. And that shifts the equation. If drones are detected early and intercepted consistently, their psychological and strategic value declines. If mines are cleared efficiently, their ability to disrupt shipping diminishes. If fast attack threats are met with equally fast, networked responses, their advantage erodes. The strategy doesn't collapse overnight, but its effectiveness is reduced. The broader implication is global. Ukraine is showing that power in the current era is increasingly tied to adaptability and proven capability. It is not about having the most resources. It is about having the right solutions at the right time. And this is where the final shift becomes clear. Ukraine is not just responding to its own war. It is exporting the lessons of that war. It is turning necessity into influence, and influence into long-term partnerships that reshape regional security structures. So when you look at the Strait of Hormuz, the question is no longer just whether it can be threatened. The question is whether those threats can still produce the same level of impact in a system that is becoming more resilient, more adaptive, and more informed by real combat experience. Because the future of power may not belong to those who can threaten disruption, but to those who can quietly prevent it.